All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will not be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of Yip Man's disappointing forms, lots of I don't care if you speak fluent Cantonese, Yip Man will not teach you Kung Fu. So let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
It's good, Sifu.
Nothing
I'm
much,
good.
man. Yeah.
You good?
I'm really good, man.
All right.
Although I shouldn't be, to be quite honest. So, I don't know. I mentioned it a couple times on this podcast. Maybe, I don't really drink, all right? much to the disappointment of my very German father, right?
Okay.
I just never developed a taste for alcohol. You know, people ask me why I don't drink, and it's like, I just never really developed a taste for it.
So no Oktoberfests, none of that?
No, although I've actually been to Oktoberfest in Munich,
right.
like the real one. But no, I'm not I don't really drink. Although in recent years, I started to drink beer occasionally. Now, when I say occasionally, maybe once a month, but usually once every 3 months. And it'll be a beer, one beer. All right?
And it's usually after an event here.
No, not even that. Not even that. I just mean in general, once every 3 months, I'll have a beer, right?
Oh, wow.
And occasionally, when we have like a big event, like at the end of ITC, when we have a bunch of people who have graduated, they're past their exam or whatever, then we'll go to
half a beer.
We'll go to the German. They serve everything in a big ass boot,
right.
And then I'll maybe drink a little tiny bit more.
Yeah,
I'll drink a little tiny bit more than I normally do. And occasionally when, we go to Hong Kong, I'm there with some of my students and some local friends, and they usually convince me to drink a little bit more. But the number of times I've been drunk, I could probably count on both hands. It's not like a sheer amount of times. Well, last night was one of those times, all right?
Last night you got to add to the...
I got to add. Yeah, maybe I'm going to need a third hand now to start counting. Our friend on Instagram, Bruce Willow.
Yeah.
He goes by Bruce Willow.
Okay.
His name's actually Bruno.
Right.
He's a stunt guy from Portugal. Now, if you don't follow the Bruce Willow on Instagram, you need to do that right now. You need to follow the Bruce Willow right now because first of all, the stuff that he does is hysterical. He's we're about the same height, but he's like a little bit broader. But he can flip and do twists and high kicks and spins and all that kind of stuff, right? So he'll do things that he calls like Kung Fu copycat, where he'll take scenes from movies and he will copy it, right? Usually instead of fighting people, he'll fight like a Bob dummy or something like that. Nice. But he'll do all the same kind of athletic stuff. He'll do stuff from the movie Dragons Forever, and he even attempted Sammo Hung's aerial flip and then spin kick and then sweep from Eastern Condors. And you see, he shows how many times he goes for it, right? And it was funny because...
blooper reel, too.
Svetlana, Woo Woman, she saw that, and then we shot some reels yesterday. So probably by the time this episode comes out, those reels will already be on Instagram.
So you already drunk shooting the reels?
No, I wasn't drunk shooting the reels. Right. But it was funny because Bruno was really doing that aerial flip that Sammo does, right? And Svetlana's like, oh, you know that Sammo used the wire on that, right? So he's the crazy dude who's actually, first of all, Sammo really does the aerial flip, but he's probably on a wire, which allows him to soften the landing. So he really has to do the flip, but the wire just allows him to land a little more softer.
Okay.
So that he can then do the spin kick and then the lower kick, whereas our boy Bruno was really doing the flip.
No wire.
Landing full hard with his body weight and then did the kick. And then the spin sweep, right? And it took him a number of attempts. But so if you don't follow the Bruce Willow on Instagram, and you're a fan of kung fu and silliness and stunts and stuff like that, he's hysterical. He's so good at what he does, and he happens to be in New York. At the time of this recording. And so we shot a couple reels, which should be out. We did some movement and mobility-based stuff because we didn't really have enough time to do some kind of fight choreography.
Some Eminem stuff.
Yeah, and then last night we went to K-Town, to Koreatown, and then he's like, hey, have a Qingdao beer. Hey, have another one. Long story short, I drank 5 beers, which might not be a lot for some people. Okay. All right? For me, that's close to the most amount that I've
I've
ever drank at one time,
That's
right?
nothing.
And I was off my rocker last night. But I'm you never, like, when people drink, you never know what kind of drunk they turn into, right?
Dude, I'm a super lightweight.
Yeah.
I admit it, but I'm a happy.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah.
I'm a lightweight, but if I drink, I'm just I've been told I'm just a slightly more talkative and loving version of myself. I tell people how amazing they are. I'd be like, Dre, do you realize dude, you kill it on the podcast? I just need to tell you, you're the most amazing thing in the world, right?
Okay.
So anyway, I was a little worried when we were going to record this podcast early that I would be suffering, but
You're not that hungover.
no,
I thought you were going
No,
to be.
I had some Pedialyte first thing in the morning, and I had coffee, and no, I actually feel fine.
All
so,
right.
but if the audience notices any brain fog, then you know the reason why.
All right.
So anyway, what you got for me today?
I was thinking.
Here we go. He was thinking. Careful now.
We've been doing a lot of consecutive AMAs.
I don't pay you to think.
Yeah, well,
I don't pay you at all.
that's why I don't do it often. I don't do it often, but
Right.
dude, you were just on the Fat Samurai last week.
Shout out to Fat Samurai.
Yeah, shout out to Fat Samurai.
Although, again, by the time this episode comes out,
Yeah.
you were just on the Fat Samurai channel
Months
4 weeks ago.
Yeah, right. And we're going over a recent Yip Man movie that
Yes.
is
IP man.
phenomenally trash.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Straight trash.
phenomenally inaccurate. I haven't seen it yet,
Yes,
but
as opposed to
you
all the other
guys-
Yip Man movies.
You guys tore this movie a new asshole.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. Which was difficult because the whole movie is a huge asshole. It was hard to tear it a new one.
But what's interesting is I don't think these movies are doing Yip Man any justice as to what he actually accomplished in general everyday life, walking down the street life. No one knows Yip Man, and I think you.
Oh, I know Yip Man. I know him well.
You're probably you're doing a documentary on Yip Man.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
Whether I can actually get it done or not is another story, right?
That's another story.
Yeah,
But-
although I would actually say probably Seafood David Peterson knows more about Yip Man stuff than I do. Right?
Why don't you just fill us in?
Fill you guys in? Oh,
give
sure,
us
no problem.
Give us a sneak preview of the documentary, or just tell us about Yip Man.
Right.
The real Yip Man.
So I can
the real life guy.
So I can basically be called a fraud because I'm always talking about how, like, yo, bro, we don't even know what happened in the 50s. Why are people making claims about what Dr. Leung Jan did in 18? Okay, now let's do an episode where I tell you exactly what the history of Yip Man is, all right? Well, the thing is that
people want to know.
people want to know. But again, I'm probably not the most qualified person to discuss this because, one, I never coexisted with the late beloved Grandmaster Yip Man, all right? I was not even a piece of protein
But you
in
know
1972.
many that have. And you've
I
heard
do.
many of the stories.
And I've heard many stories, and we've
First-hand
documented a lot of
stories.
stuff. Yes.
So,
And
give
and
us-
I've taken a lot of notes, and also a lot of the notes that I got were from books that other people can get too. So it's not like I'm privy to anything that other people are not. I just took notes, like the Wing Chun athletic, like the genealogy of the Wing Chun family. That
Right.
book.
Okay.
There's a lot of information there.
you
But also,
showed me this book.
yeah, also Stephen David Peterson's book on Wong Sun Leung actually has a really nice section on the history of Yip Man, where there were a lot of things in there which I hadn't even
Mind-blowing.
heard before. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Well, obviously we're in a weird time period now where Yip Man is becoming more fictionalized than the fictionalized accounts of Yip Man. Like the balance right now is like starting to go into the legendary Yip Man, which is now everything is skewed by all these films, right?
Okay.
Which we don't quite have with Bruce Lee, but probably at some point soon we will have that as well. We definitely have it with Wong Fei-hung.
Okay.
What were you gonna say? You
Are
look
there
like
any
you're-
photos of him with hair?
Oh, so to my knowledge, no. All right, but I would love to be proved wrong on that. All right.
Wow.
So from what I understand, you have to realize Grandmaster Yip Man came to Hong Kong in 1949. He was essentially fleeing the communist takeover, right?
Yeah.
He was a member of the Kuomintang Party, which
And
was
this wasn't his first time in Hong Kong.
It wasn't his first time in Hong Kong.
Okay.
But he essentially fled China with more or less the shirt on his back. And
last second.
because he was a member of the Kuomintang Party, which was the opposing party to the communists, and essentially if you're an enemy of the communists, then at that time you didn't have long to live. So that's why in 1949, when the communists took over China, there was a huge migration of Chinese people outside to leave China and go to either Hong Kong, which was a British colony, so it wasn't under China rule, or Macau, which was a Portuguese colony at that time, or to go to Taiwan, which was independent of China.
Those three places.
So that's why in 1949, many Kung Fu masters of legitimate martial arts styles in China actually left China and went to places like Taiwan, Macau, or Hong Kong. And that's why you can find a lot of authentic Chinese martial art lineages in those three countries. Whereas in China, especially during the Cultural Revolution, a lot of aspects of Chinese culture, the old ways, you were not allowed to do. You weren't allowed to practice Chinese martial arts openly because that was the old culture. You weren't allowed to do certain traditional things, right? In fact, during the Cultural Revolution, you had to, for example, take things like statues of Guanggong, the old traditional. You had to burn it in public to show that you're 100% loyal to the communist government, right? So that's why you have to imagine how many books were lost during that time, how many manuscripts, artifacts, all sorts of things, and how many Kung Fu masters that didn't leave China didn't pass on their art because they didn't want to get in trouble. So there's so much died during that time, especially in the 50s and 60s, right? Damn. So, so we really have, if they weren't already in Macau, Hong Kong, or Taiwan, then they came around 1949. So to my knowledge, all right, and again, I am super willing to be proven wrong on this, there is no photo of Grandmaster Yip Man predating 1949. As a matter of fact, the photo that we all kind of seen, the one that's on the poster that is right here across the entrance to our school, that photo, from my understanding, is, I think, the first photo that we have of Grandmaster Yip Man. So that is the youngest photo we have of Yip Man. And shortly around that time, I think that is the first photo. But there's another photo where he's wearing Western dress. He's wearing a suit and tie, which is the only photo of him wearing Western clothing. I believe it's a toss-up between those two photos, the one that's on this poster and that one where he's wearing the Western dress, because I think that was a photo for like an ID or something like that. Okay. Those two photos, from my understanding, and again, I'm super willing to be proven wrong, I believe those are the earliest photos we have of him. So they're already of him when he's in his late 50s, and they're already of him when he's in Hong Kong. So we don't, to my knowledge, have photos of him when he still lived in Fatsan. We don't have photos of him when he was in China. So that's why we would not have photos of him with hair. I also have been told that the Grandmaster Yip Man didn't like having photos taken of him. Now, you have to remember the old generation of Chinese,
unlike Bruce Lee.
They were still kind of suspicious of things like photos, right? They were. I believe that there was even a certain Chinese belief a very long time ago, obviously, that like if you took a photo of someone, you're kind of like taking their soul or something, or there was like a lot of weird superstition when it came to
new
that
technology.
Kind of stuff. So and that's also the reason why people say, oh, Grandmaster Yip Man didn't like to be photographed performing kung fu. Although oddly enough, we actually have not a fair amount, but we do have photos of him performing kung fu, both solo and in those photos taken by Bruce Lee with Robert Chan, and they're like actual technical sequences of Yip Man doing some Wing Chun, right? So it's not entirely true that he didn't like to do it. I think he preferred not to. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I don't think that there's any photo before that time. If there was, man, I would love. I want to be proven wrong because I want to see that photo, right? And I think what people don't realize sometimes about Yip Man is Yip Man was born in 1893. All right, so he was born like October 14th, 1893. Actually, same birthday as Helio Gracie, by the way. Same birth date. I don't think it's the same year, although I also could be wrong on that. Although I doubt. I think obviously Helio Gracie was way younger than Yip Man. But they had the same birth date.
Wow.
So 1893 was still Qing Dynasty China. So you have to imagine, like, Yip Man, the time that he lived in, he was born in the last Chinese dynasty. And then he went through the Republic era, the communist takeover, and then went to colonial Hong Kong. And then lived until 72, which, although, 1972 is maybe not as modern as 2022, but 72 in terms of like human history. In 1972, you have movies, you have TV, you have cars, you have flight. So a relatively modern era, and he was born in Qing Dynasty China and lived into an era where there were cars and planes and TV and movies and stuff like that, right?
A lot of advancement,
All of that advancement happened during his lifetime. So Yip Man was alive during an extremely rich time for not just China or Hong Kong, but the world in general. Like he lived like the world that he was born into.
Nothing.
Like
lot.
We can say the time we were born. Obviously now we have mobile phones and we have internet and we have all this stuff.
We're always talking crap about this generation too.
Yeah,
like,
but
they got all these.
But like the technology notwithstanding, like the internet and stuff like that. Like we were born in the 70s. It's still relatively modern when you look at the scope of like the world history, right?
Okay.
But the change from when we were born in the 70s to today, you can argue there's been a big cultural shift because of the internet and mobile phones and stuff like that, but it's nowhere near like Yip Man being born in 1893 and dying in 72. I think the change that happened within that time, it could be argued, is more drastic than the change that's gone on in our lives, right?
Okay.
So his father's name was Yip Oi Do, and his mother's surname was Ng, that surname, right? So his mom was surnamed Ng, right? I have some notes here, partially because I was worried about being hungover, and two, also with like dates, I didn't want to get something wrong. And then you know how people are in the comments, like, actually this didn't happen in 1907, happened in 1908. It's like
October 14.
Well, actually 13. you Googled it while you were watching this episode, whereas I just said it. So he had an older brother, Yip Kai Kak. All right. I don't have the Chinese character, so I cannot vouch for the exact pronunciation.
All right.
And he had an older sister, Yip Wan Mei. So an older brother and older sister, and then he had a younger sister as well. So
I wonder if they knew
four
Kung
of
Fu.
them. I don't think so. His family was heavily invested in like real estate and business. As a matter of fact, although his family was in Fazan being a pretty major town in the Guangdong province, right? It's not
Have you ever been to Fazan?
I have been to Fazan, right? It's part of mainland China now, right? But in those days, it's just part of Guangdong, and it's actually not that far from Hong Kong.
Okay.
If you take a train or a bus, or maybe, I think by train, maybe an hour, maybe a little bit more, something like that. It's not that far, but you have to imagine in the time that Yip Man was born, he's born into a wealthy family. They own land and they own businesses. His family in Fazan owned businesses in Hong Kong. All right, but like back then, like now, if someone owns a business in another city, you're like, oh, that's pretty cool, right? But you own a business in another city in the 1800s, right?
Okay.
It's kind of major, right? And that gives you an idea that he was someone who came from means. So that's not the normal setup for a lot of people who learn Kung Fu in those days. Apparently, the family's holdings were spread between like Fazan, the countryside, and Hong Kong, and they owned several businesses.
Wow.
All right. So this is quite remarkable for that time. So he really came from money. And that was something that they kind of got right in the first Donnie Yen IP Man movie.
Okay.
When you saw his house in the first one, he lived like in a big house and it had a courtyard and all that kind of stuff. That could actually be kind of accurate, because until the time of like the Second World War and all of that, I think that he did live a relatively comfortable life. But the truth is, we really don't know that much before 1949. Hey, Kung Fu Genius listeners, if you're looking for an easy way to support this podcast, please consider joining the Kung Fu Genius Patreon. You can support for as little as $5 a month and get access to episodes a few days early. Higher levels of support get additional goodies, exclusive content, and even your name in the description. The baller level of support will give you the opportunity to be a Dre for a day and give me a rest from this guy over here. A link for the Kung Fu Genius Patreon page is in the description below. You can also support us by subscribing to the Kung Fu Genius on YouTube, liking this video, and sharing it on your social media platforms. When you subscribe on YouTube, don't forget to hit that bell for notifications so you will know as soon as a new episode or a premiere is available for you to watch. For those of us who listen to us on audio, it's a huge help if you don't just rate the podcast, but also write a review wherever you listen to the Kung Fu Genius, such as Apple or Google Podcasts. I really appreciate it. And now back to me. So we have like little drips and drabs of facts here and there, but really it's not
We
a whole
do know
lot.
he was 5'0" before then, right?
Something like that.
Something like
so, but just to like kind of timeline it, all right?
DEA.
Yip Man was around 11 or 12 when he started learning Wing Chun. So if we're timelining that,
I was
it's
curious about that.
1904, 1905.
Wow.
All right, just to give you an idea when he started learning Wing Chun, right? Because we often say stuff like, oh, Yip Man began at age 11, and you think about an 11-year-old kid learning Wing Chun, but it's also important to think like that was 1904, 1905. Right? Because you have to timeline stuff in order to give it context to make it more relevant. Don't just think, oh, Yip Man started when he was 11 and you just think of an 11-year-old boy. You have to think of an 11-year-old boy in 1904. Okay? So that gives you a little bit of context. So Chanhua Shun, all right, the Wing Chun Sifu, we become Yip Man Sifu. Chanhua Shun was, from what I understood, the final student of Leung Chan. Leung Chan being up to that point, one of the most famous practitioners of the Wing Chun style. Leung Chan was kind of our version of Wong Fei Hong. He was not only a Wing Chun ass kicker, but he was also a scholar, and he was also a doctor. Right, so he would also like heal. He would beat your ass and then heal you, right?
Heal you right
and then
after.
probably deliver a moral message why you shouldn't pick fights with doctors or something like that, right?
Okay.
And so Chanhua Shun was apparently the last student or one of the last students of Leung Chan. Now, unlike Leung Chan, Chanhua Shun was apparently not a scholar. In fact, he had a nickname which was Wah the Bull, because he was kind of big and stocky, and he was a money changer. All right. Now, what a money changer is, at that time they didn't have like a standard currency, so you had like taels of silver, and so like you would have like let's say an ounce of silver or whatever, right? But you need change, so then you would have to go to someone like a money changer. He was called Zhao Qinhua, which literally means like the guy, like Wa meaning his name.
Yeah.
Like the guy who gives you change.
Wow.
So you would go to him with like, I don't know, a tael of silver and be like, can you break this into 4 for me or something like that? And he would give you whatever units were equivalent to that tael of silver, right? So you had to go kind of like a bank, but like specifically to change.
Like a money exchange in Times Square.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Right? And that's what he did. But besides the fact that he was a money changer, he apparently wasn't like the most educated or refined guy on the block. But for all intents and purposes, he taught Wing Chun, and he taught Wing Chun informally on one of the Yip family properties. So
Interesting.
Yeah, so Yip Man's father was essentially Chanhua Shun's landlord. And so Chanhua Shun was teaching on one of like the Yip properties. Maybe it was like it could have been just they're just renting it a couple times a week or something like that, right? And so because Chanhua Shun was renting a space or a property or whatever from Yip's father, the young Yip Man would watch, and he saw the Wing Chun training, and he became fascinated with it. Now, at that time, I mean, China was very classist, right? Like, so you have like the elites and the rich, and normally they don't do martial arts. Martial arts was something more for, let's say, the lower classes, right? Yeah, to kind of keep them occupied, right? Whereas it would be expected that someone from Yip Man's stock would become highly educated and would pursue things like literature, maybe a government position or something like that, and wouldn't necessarily do martial arts, although back in the day, knowing martial arts was actually required to have a government position, but that was an older time. We're talking not in the 1900s, right? So Yip Man wanted to learn Wing Chun from Chan Wa-shun, so he basically went to Chan Wa-shun and asked him to teach him. And
11-year-old boy.
Yeah, and supposedly, now again, this is all hearsay, right? When I say this, I'm like, this is not a Netflix documentary where all this stuff's been corroborated. All right, these are
I love Netflix documentaries.
These are basically the stories that most people say. So like, you know, there's a small degree of certainty that something like this happened. The details, I mean, obviously we don't know. But most people kind of, according to Yip Man's, because this story also comes from Yip Man's first interview with New Martial Hero, where he did talk about some of this stuff himself, right? So there could be something to it, right? He asked Chan Wa-shun to teach him, and Chan Wa-shun did not want to teach him because he looked at him as like he's kind of like the rich guy's son, and it's not really like right for him to learn martial arts, right? But also he's also the son of the landlord that he's renting from, so put him in like in an awkward position, right? Because he doesn't want to like piss his kid off, piss off his father, or lose his space. So he essentially, to dissuade the boy from joining, he said that he needed 20 ounces of silver to start learning Wing Chun from Chan Wa-shun. Now, for context, all right, according to my notes here, 20 ounces of silver was enough to buy a house, finance a marriage, or start a modest business. Okay? So he's asking him for like a real chunk of coin. It's not like saying today, like, oh, if you want to learn from me, you got to give me $300. No. This is more than that. This is much
like
more
$30K.
Than that. Yeah, this is like some real shit, right? Yip Man came back with that amount.
Yo.
And
11-year-old boy coming back with $30K.
Yeah, and Chan Wa-shun apparently was like not too sure about it. So he asked Yip Man's father, and Yip Man's father was like, "Yeah, it's okay," and they gave him that. Right?
Oh my goodness.
So so that gives you kind of an idea. So at that point, at either age 11 or 12, Yip Man becomes the 16th and final student of Chan Wa-shun. All right.
Wow.
Yeah. So the relationship between Chan Wa-shun and Yip Man would not actually last very long, because Chan Wa-shun passed away only a few years later. And this is why I always kind of have to laugh a little bit at there's certain lineages within the Yip Man system, okay, that are so staunchly conservative about like their position to Yip Man, and also saying things like like you have to learn from your sifu teaches you by hand, and like the only way to learn proper Wing Chun is by your sifu. And the reason why they say this is because there are people within the Wing Chun family, both directly under Yip Man and otherwise, who actually learn more from their sihengs, even though, let's say, Yip Man was actually their sifu, but they learn more from their siheng than they did from their sifu. Bruce Lee being an example of that, right? You know, Bruce Lee's sifu, his paternal kung fu father or whatever, is Yip Man, but he actually learned mostly from his siheng Wong Sun Leung and from some others, right? But that's totally normal. But there's some students of Yip Man who maybe they have the chance to learn directly from Yip Man and only from Yip Man. And then they will tell you, like, well, if you didn't really learn directly from Yip Man the whole time, you know, your Wing Chun must be trash, right? It's they don't say it outright, but it's implied.
It must be
all
trash.
Right? And then they talk, you know, it's like so and so didn't really learn from Yip Man. He actually learned from his siheng, or so and so learned from Yip Man's student, and then later learned a little bit from Yip Man. Like, so they actually use it to attack someone's credentials if they didn't purely learn from their sifu the whole time.
Wow.
And the reason why that shit blows my mind is because you're like, do you guys actually remember what Yip Man's own history is? Because if you apply that template of only if you learn privately and you're the closest student who learned the most from their sifu are you worth shit in Wing Chun, well then I'm sorry, you gotta kick Yip Man out of that whole argument. Yeah. Because from what we understand, around 1908, so Yip Man had been doing Wing Chun for 3 years. Wow. Chan Wa-shun passes away. So let's give it 3 years to. I think I've heard he's 14. So you would have to say that like all of this secret holy training from sifu to student is between the age of 11 to 14 or 12 to 14. So if you go by this ultra conservative model that many of Yip Man students go for, then you would have to say a preteen and early teenage boy learned all the most important stuff from his sifu during that time. Because all the time you spend not with your sifu is total trash, according to many of Yip Man's ultra-conservative students, right? And then you go, if you apply this to Yip Man, you have a problem. Because you're basically saying Yip Man could never have been good at Wing Chun because the amount of time he had with his sifu was very little. All right. So there are students of Yip Man who were able to learn from Yip Man for many more years than Yip Man ever could learn from his own sifu.
Okay.
Right. And supposedly at the time of Chan Washun's passing, like right before he passed, he told Chong So being one of, either Chong So was the Dai Sihing in Chan Washun school, or he was at least one of the most. I don't know. I'm going to assume he was the Dai Sihing.
Okay.
But maybe he wasn't. But he was obviously a Sihing of Yip Man because Yip Man was the last student, so everyone was his Sihing, right?
Yeah.
But Chong So specifically was tasked to teach Yip Man by Chan Washun because Chan Washun knew he was dying. And he's like, you teach the boy when I'm gone. Oh. So most of Yip Man's Kung Fu prior to going to Hong Kong, he actually learned from his Siheng, all right? Because age 14, Yip Man let's say he goes to Hong Kong around age 18 or so. He could have been slightly older, again, because the timeline is very sketchy on this. He goes from Fatshan to Hong Kong to go to college, all right? Or what we would call university. Because sometimes the term in the British school system, sometimes college can mean something else, right? So you have to be careful, like when you're talking
That's
about.
So, Mikey Deane.
It is actually. Let me see. I wanted to chime in, but you were just like all the way there.
Yeah. Right.
Well, okay. Very, very brief thing. College. Yeah. University is university. Sometimes when people say they're going to college, they mean university, but what they might actually mean is further education, which is the ages between 16 and 18, and then 18 is university onwards.
Right.
That's the quick capsule review like the 60s, 70s when you start getting into polytechnics and universities.
Right.
Which are essentially the same things.
Yeah, in Hong Kong. Yeah, when you go to Hong Kong, you see all these like Hong Kong Polytechnic University, like all these words and stuff, like these are all vestiges from the British system, right? Wow. And also like elementary school is basically what we call elementary school to middle school. They call it Siu Hok, which means like the young study.
And call it primary school in England.
Yeah, middle school is Zhong Hok, which is like middle school, and then it's not really middle school. That Zhong Hok is also what we call high school.
Yeah, which we call secondary school.
Secondary school, right? And they call it middle school. We call it high school because university in Chinese they call it Dai Hok, which is the big study. So it's like you have the little study, the middle study, and the big study. And that big study is not high school. The big study is university. The middle study is what we call high school.
Okay.
So that's why, like, when you go over there and you see that, you have to be mindful that they're not using the same exact terms as we use in our awesome American system.
Polytechnic either.
Right? So Yip Man went to St. Stephen's College in Hong Kong, supposedly to study, of all things, English. All right. Now, the weird thing is I never really heard any stories about Yip Man speaking English.
He wasn't that good at learning English.
Well, I don't know, but supposedly he had studied it. So the assumption would be he could speak some English. But the weird thing is that Yip Man was known as someone who was not super fond of the West and Westerners. And but at some point supposedly studied English at St. Stephen's College
so well that he just kind of
kept
it under the rug and just like when people talked around him, he was like,
I think that's some Beardy level speculation. All right. But interesting thing, St. Stephen's College was on still is in existence, although I think the current campus
the school that Yip Man went to.
Yeah, you can still go there. And if you go to their website, they're like famous alumni Yip Man, and like obviously since then a lot of other famous people like TV people also went to school there, but like they're very proud, like Yip Man went to ours, so they actually have it there on their website. But I think that the campus, the current St. Stephen's College campus, is different from where it was when Yip Man went there. I think they moved it, and I think partially because I think it was actually damaged during the Second World War. Okay. When Yip Man obviously was already back in China, I think the first St. Stephen's College campus was damaged, and they had to move it. Oddly enough, St. Stephen's College is essentially next door to what's called the American Club, which is where they shot Enter the Dragon. The final fight, Hans Island, basically.
Yeah.
Was actually shot on the south side of Hong Kong Island on some tennis courts. It's the American Club. And there's... It's mostly all renovated and rebuilt. But there's still one rock wall from Enter the Dragon that's still there. You can go see it. But you need to be a member of that club. It's like a very hoity-toity club. But the Kung Fu Genius knows people who are part of that club. So I can go there if I want to. I've never been, though. But apparently one rock wall that Bruce runs across when he's chasing Han at the end.
Okay.
Apparently that rock wall. I think that rock wall is still there.
I'm thinking of the wall that he scaled when he was doing the
Jesus Christ. Take it easy.
Night.
No.
Night tail or whatever. He's knocked the mic off.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, just in terms of where all that stuff comes together, right? So, but
right next door.
Yeah, so, talking about Yip Man not being very fond of Westerners, okay? Because a lot of people say, well, Yip Man didn't want non-Chinese to learn Wing Chun, all right? And I know I'm jumping around a little bit. I'm trying to keep it chronological, but as these things pop in my head, I want to say them because if I don't, I will literally forget them.
Okay.
Or I'll forget to say them later. People are like, oh, well, the old traditional Chinese sifus didn't want to teach Westerners, right? But Yip Man was even more extreme than that. Now, you can't, of course, when you look at it through a 2022 lens, you go like, oh, that's not very progressive. It's like, dude, this was a dude born in the Qing dynasty, okay? Mm-hmm. You have to look at him through the lens of the culture he grew up in.
He may have had the haircut.
When he was younger, for sure. He would have had the Qing dynasty Q because that was mandated by all men had to have that hairstyle, So in the previous dynasties, especially in the Ming dynasty, which was right before the Qing dynasty, it was normal for Chinese men to have their hair pulled back into a long braid. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the older you were, the longer your braid was. So your braid was considered your lifeline. That's why you never cut it. So obviously, the older you were, the longer your braid was, and that's why sometimes they would have to put it around their neck because it would get longer as you got older, right? But the whole idea of shaving the front part of your head, that was a specific Qing, a Manchu custom. That was not ethnic Chinese. And when the Qing dynasty took over, when they took over Beijing, you have to remember they were not ethnically Chinese. These were essentially like Tartars or like descendants of Genghis Khan or the Manchu people, were not ethnic Chinese. And that was the traditional hairstyle for them. Because they were now the new rulers of mighty China, they mandated that all Chinese men had to have that hairstyle. But here's the crazy thing. The Manchus also had a very specific hairstyle for women. But they did not mandate that Chinese women had to have the Manchu women hairstyle. They only did it for the men because the point was to break the spirit of the Chinese men, because it was, we are your rulers now, you are going to have our hairstyle. And there was even a saying in Chinese that if you do not cut the front of your hair, they will cut your head. All right? I believe that you had to, I think the law was like every 3 or 4 days, you had to shave it with a razor. And if you didn't, they would literally decapitate you. All right. So so you have to realize when you see kung fu movies that are in the Qing dynasty, that was not really the hairstyle then. That hairstyle was a symbol of oppression from the Manchus on. That's why when you look at, you watch 36 Chambers, why does everyone hate the damn Manchus, right? They have their funny clothing and they're making everyone they're forcing the men to put their hair in that style, right? So they were very oppressed at that time. Like literally the movie 36 Chambers is about that, all right? Wow. So in 1912, that's when the Qing dynasty was overthrown. And when the new government, the new Republic government came in, the first thing they did was outlaw that hairstyle. Because that was the old hairstyle. And they actually had military squads go out to chop that hair off of all the people. Like, we're going to get rid of this damn hairstyle now. Wow. So that means that at 1912, That hairstyle was dunzos.
Done.
Done. That's why when I was on the Fat Samurai channel and we talked about Yip Man, The Awakening.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be Yip Man in Hong Kong in the 1930s, which he was not in Hong Kong in the 1930s, from what I understood. His buddy had the Qing Dynasty Q. And it's like,
I
first
remember,
of all, if you're in
ripping
Hong
him.
Kong, you certainly would not have had that hairstyle. But also, they made the new government made that hairstyle illegal. It was illegal during the Qing Dynasty to not have that hairstyle, and then they later made it illegal to have that hairstyle, right?
So he wasn't allowed to have that.
But that also means that Yip Man, at the time when he was growing up, he would have had that hairstyle. You have to imagine, like, Yip Man would have had his hair shaved in the front and would have had that braid.
To what age? I'm thinking. Trying to do math.
No, let's say he had to keep it until 1912. All right? So he's 19 years old when he no longer has to have that hairstyle. So 19, 20 years old. So maybe around the time he came to Hong Kong, that was also around the time when that government was overthrown, right? So, but interesting to kind of come back to Yip Man, right? Everyone knows that he was not fond of Westerners learning Wing Chun and foreigners and stuff. And Bruce Lee also felt the effects of that when he was in the States.
Very open about that.
Well, when Bruce was in the States and he was teaching, his first student was Jesse Glover, who was a black guy. And later, apparently, he had even asked Yip Man if Jesse could be officially accepted into the Wing Chun family. And Yip Man was like, no. But here's the thing. It wasn't just a matter of Westerners. Yeah, I mean, if Yip Man could fast forward to the future and see a podcast and someone would explain to him what this is. It's about like, we're both people who teach Wing Chun in New York. And this, like, he'd probably be flaming pissed. He'd be flaming, a connuption fit. Yes. Something that hasn't even been invented yet. Right. But here's the thing. Yip Man also purportedly did not even like to teach the wrong Chinese. So it wasn't just like, oh, you're like a white dude or a black dude or whatever, I'm not going to teach you. You had to be a Southern Chinese person.
Wow.
If you were a Northern Chinese person, supposedly Yip Man would not teach you. So you have to, like, I think that's something that people don't understand is, like, for a lot of Asians, it's like the tribal racism and prejudice between other types of Chinese, between other types of Asians, like the Japanese and the Koreans, like all that stuff going on. But like Yip Man would not even teach Northern Chinese. I think if you were north of Shanghai, I think he would give you the bird.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But I asked the late Sifu Chanchi Man, I said, okay, Hong Kong was a British colony. So you had a lot of Brits, you had a lot of expats living in Hong Kong. Obviously, even in the 1950s, before Yip Man and Bruce Lee, all this stuff became famous, you had Brits in Hong Kong. So I have to imagine that there's got to be some British kid that grew up in Hong Kong. You know, his dad is like an official or a police or in the military or whatever, that was fascinated with Chinese martial arts because he's growing up in Hong Kong. Right. And wanted to learn it. So I asked Sifu Chanji Man, I said, during the time you were learning, learning from Yip Man in the 50s, was there ever a Westerner? Because you have to imagine, like, we think it's so normal for a Westerner to want to learn Asian martial arts or whatever. Yeah, but you think about that after Bruce Lee was big, after all this stuff was big. I'm not talking about 1970s Hong Kong where you got all these white dudes going to Hong Kong trying to learn the secrets from the masters. I'm talking about 1950s Hong Kong, before this stuff was even really famous. So I asked Siva Chanchiman, I said, like, was there ever a Westerner who showed up to the class wanting to learn? Yeah. And he thought about it and he said, yes. He said, one time there was a British kid, I mean, like, let's imagine like a teenager. Yeah. Who came to the Restaurant Workers Union, which is where Yip Man was teaching in the 50s, and wanted to learn Wing Chun because he was growing up in Hong Kong. He apparently maybe also went to school with some other Chinese kids. Wow. And this teenager, this British teen, spoke Cantonese. Pitch perfect Cantonese. Wow. Like a local. Yeah. And according to what Sifu Chanchiman told me, this Western kid went to Grandmaster Yip Man in a super respectful way. So the kid not only knew how to speak Chinese, but he also understood Chinese culture. So he would be very different from a lot of the other British kids who grew up in Hong Kong and just shat all over Chinese culture, right? No. You know, because you have to imagine they were there as the ruling class. Like, this was a this was a British kid who had a fondness for Chinese culture and came to Grandmaster Yip Man very respectfully, spoke Cantonese to him, and asked to become a student. And apparently Chan Chi Man witnessed this thing. And he said Yip Man very politely declined. All right? You have to imagine, I mean, like, how crazy that is. Someone from a totally different culture comes to you, knowing all about your culture, speaks your language, and you have this thing that's running on the hard drive of how you interact with people that's so ingrained, you're like, no. But apparently Yip Man was actually polite about it because he spoke Chinese.
And so well, too.
Yeah, but he otherwise had no desire, right? And, you know, and again...
Can you imagine if he taught him?
That'd be crazy. You know, there's this one lone Western student who learned from Grandmaster Yip Man and spoke perfect Chinese, right?
Barry Genovese.
Yeah, that guy would be an insufferable prick. Because he would be the only one, you know what I mean? Hey Kung Fu Genius listeners, are you a fan of Wing Chun Kung Fu? Well, if you listen to me, I assume you are. I got great news for KFG fans. Right now, you can get an all-access 1-month free trial subscription to Wing Chun Illustrated magazine. Yes, I said free. Go to WCINewsstand.com and register in the upper right-hand corner. Fill out your email and password and use the code KFG Trial to get your free trial to all the issues from 2011 to the current issue. That's right, all the issues. Even the one with this cool guy on the cover. That's me for those of you listening to us on audio. My Kung Fu Genius column is also in all the new issues, as if you needed another reason to get this awesome magazine. Go get your free trial subscription today. For all that information, check out the description below. And now back to me. Yeah, so basically, you know, he learns from, you know, Tan Rasan, then he learns from Chung So, and then he ends up going to Hong Kong to St. Stephen's College. Now, here's where, even though now we're talking about slightly more recent history than him learning from Chan Washun, but here's where there's a little bit of controversy, okay? Because according to Yip Man, and according to many of his students, and of course they got that information from Yip Man, or maybe they got it from the first New Martial Hero interview or whatever, during the time that Yip Man was in Hong Kong to study English at St. Stephen's College, he learned Wing Chun from a secondary instructor, okay? So the story was that he learned Wing Chun from someone named Leung Bik. Leung Bik being the son of Leung Jan, with Leung Jan being Yip Man Si Gong. So he's learning from his Si Gong son, who learned Wing Chun from his father. So that makes him like a Kung Fu uncle, whether that guy is... If Chan Washun was the last student of Leung Jan, then we will assume that Leung Bik was senior to Chan Washun, although I don't know, and I'm willing to be corrected on that. So some kind of sibak, some kind of Kung Fu uncle. But unlike Chan Washun, supposedly Leung Bik, being the son of Leung Jan, was educated and was able to explain the theories in more detail, because obviously Wing Chun is a style, like there's obviously a physical component. You got to train, you got to hit the wall bag, you got to do your chi sao, you got to spar, you got to put in your sweat equity if you want to be good at it, right? But also there are a lot of elements in there, like you know, how the centerline theory is explained, how it's used, how this applies to fighting, the deeper theories, how like all the things that need some explanation. You need someone who has the vocabulary to do that and the education to do that. And if someone doesn't, for example, as supposedly was the case with Chan Washun, the Wing Chun that he learned from his Sifu and then presumably from his seeing Chung So would have been a little bit less refined because it lacked the explanation about how these things work, right? You can learn Wing Chun without learning the theory, but it would be really rough, right? You could kind of learn by copying, but the moment you can explain about timing and distance and angle and being proactive and sticking and all these kind of things, and you have a vocabulary to explain these things, obviously the student should benefit from that. So supposedly Leung Bik had that. He was more educated, so he was able to teach Yip Man Wing Chun in more detail, the theories, apparently complete him on the wooden dummy techniques, maybe the weapons, but it's very ambiguous because there are some people that claim that Leung Bik never existed. And for the longest time, I also believed that. I thought, okay, maybe it's just a fairy tale. Maybe Yip Man is using the name Leung Bik to cover for the fact that he actually learned from someone else. Maybe he learned from someone more local. But because that guy later was a competitor of Yip Man or a contemporary, Yip Man didn't want to give that guy the credit. Like, oh, when I was younger, I learned Wing Chun from this guy who's also teaching in the same town as me.
Wow.
So then supposedly he created this story about Leung Bik or whatever. Now the weird thing is, the pendulum swings when it comes to Kung Fu history. The pendulum swings back and forth, right? So for the longest time, it was like Yip Man learned from Chan Ma Shun, then he learned from Ising Chung So, and then he came to Hong Kong and he learned from Leung Bic. And Leung Bic essentially refined Yip Man's Wing Chun, taught him footwork and theory and all these extra stuff that he didn't know, right? And gave him it's kind of like going to Wing Chun finishing school.
Okay.
All right.
The big school.
Yeah, and then they're like, okay, that was what Leung Bic gave. And then for a while, based on the hearsay and rumors of certain Wing Chun historians, now Leung Bic doesn't exist. He secretly learned from the Siu Lam Wang Chun people. Wang meaning eternal, not Wang like praise spring. It's a style with a similar name to Wang Chun. It's Wang Chun, right? Eternal spring instead of praise spring, which is a style that's a little bit more orthodox, maybe a little bit closer to Hong Kun, although I'm not saying it's Hong Kun, just in terms of if you look at Kung Fu on a spectrum and where styles are on the spectrum, Siu Lam Wang Chun would be a little bit closer to a more orthodox style like Hong Kun, right? They have a lot more traditional forms and things like that, right? But they also have wooden dummy and things like that. And then so there was like a time where people were saying, no, actually Yip Man learned from these guys, all right? But the truth is just actually, besides people saying that now, there's no history at that time, no contemporaneous accounts of Yip Man learning from these guys. And like as if he's going to start learning a martial art in his late 50s when he's trying to establish himself as a martial arts instructor. That kind of flies in the face of how most Chinese sifus, especially when they're older, would behave. Yip Man, by the time he started teaching Wing Chun in Hong Kong, was in his late 50s. Okay. So a guy who's established in his martial art and he's starting to establish his own school. Now he's going to go twice a week and train with these dudes to pick up some stuff to teach his own guys. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's something that people were trying to peddle. Like, oh, well, they were just exchanging. It wasn't formal teaching, but actually, yes, it kind of was. Like they want to have their cake and eat it too, right? Although it doesn't really seem to make sense because although Siu Lam Wang Chun is a fantastic style and I find it really interesting. It's not for me, but I find it really interesting and fascinating. Mm-hmm. There was a beef between the Siu Lam Wang Chun people and the Yip Man Wing Chun people very early on in the history of the development of Yip Man's Wing Chun style. And it concerns Lok Yu, the second student. Some say first because there's some controversy as to whether Leung Seung was really the first student of Yip Man or whether he just overtook Lok Yu's position because he talked more and Lok Yu wasn't someone who defended himself. So he just kind of let Leung Seung take that mantle or whatever, right?
Right.
But apparently Lok Yu punched someone very prominent in the Siu Lam Wang Chun family. I'm not going to say who it is. Any savvy people on the internet can find a video of Wong Q talking about it. I don't need to say it. Punched someone very prominent in the Siu Lam Wing Chun family in the mouth for talking shit about our Wing Chun style or Leung Chan or something like that, right? So then to think that like, okay, one of Yip Man's earliest students punched one of those dudes in the mouth very early on, and now Yip Man is now going to go learn from that guy. There are too many holes in that story for it to make any sense, right? So the pendulum was like, okay, Leung Bic was the guy that taught Yip Man all this secret stuff, or not secret stuff, let's say refinement. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, no, actually Leung Bic was a fairy tale character. It was really the Siu Lam Wing Chun people. And now it seems that the pendulum is swinging back. So our good friend Jim Rosalando, who's in the Leung Chan lineage through the Pinsan Wing Chun, actually submitted to me some real interesting evidence that Leung Bic actually, in fact, did exist, right? Wow. Now, mind you, there's a photo supposedly of Leung Bic out there, but you have to be very distrustful of photos that come out of mainland China, because now that Kung Fu, like certain like Wing Chun is popular. Mm-hmm. Oh, they found photos of Leung Chan. Oh, they found photos of Leung Bic. All right. No, I think all of that stuff is bullshit. All of it is bullshit. Okay. You cannot trust it. In other words, it could be true, but the burden of proof is on them. It's not me to say it's not. I have reason to believe those photos of Leung Bic are in fact fake.
Okay.
But maybe we'll have
Figure than 4-stripe Adidas.
Figure than 4-stripe Adidas. So maybe we'll have Jim Rosalondo on, and he can discuss that. Now, so supposedly this time when Yip Man was at St. Stephen's College, he's learning English, he meets Leung Bic, he gets his Wing Chun refined. Now, another theory about why Yip Man was, in certain respects, he was very traditional. Like we talked about who he would teach and who he wouldn't teach. But in other ways, it actually seemed that he was quite scientific in, like, he believed in a scientific process. Like his early students, he wanted them to go out and test their Wing Chun against other styles, which is a very Western, very pragmatic way of looking at things, right? Yeah. And
go
you know,
to that bar up the block.
Yeah, go to that bar. Like I make all my students do that. We do the Van Damme at a kickboxer thing. I get you guys drunk, and then I insult someone there. I say that you insulted them, and then you got to fight, right?
Right. Van Damme.
So there's some stories that, or I should say, there's some speculation that the reason why Yip Man maybe had a slightly more pragmatic approach to martial arts because is not just because Wing Chun is that way, but apparently because they believe at the time he was at St. Stephen's College. St. Stephen's College wasn't just a school in Hong Kong that taught English. It was a Western style school. So Yip Man actually went to a college that actually offered Western style education, which is different from Chinese style. So that's why some people believe that whether or not Yip Man actually learned English at St. Stephen's College, maybe the biggest benefit was that he learned, he had Western style education for a period in his lifetime, which maybe allowed him to be a little bit more pragmatic in the way that he did certain things, in the way that he taught Wing Chun. So that may actually have an influence there. But again, that's, like most things, kind of speculation.
That's fire.
Yeah, interesting stuff, right? Now, there's a story during this time. Now, apparently Yip Man, when he was going to St. Stephen's College, he's younger. So we're not talking, we're not thinking like a very 21, refined, older Sifu, 19, right?
19, 20, yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about like a younger kid who is kind of scrappy and has some fighting skills, right? Yeah. And maybe the fact that he grew up like with some means, this part of him wants to rebel a little bit.
Was he always short?
You mean like, was he at one point, was he 6'4" and then he became 5'2"? No. I have a tendency to believe he was always 5'2".
Okay.
So apparently, you know, at that time, you had a lot of Indians and Pakistanis in Hong Kong, and there was a Pakistani police officer, right?
Okay.
In Hong Kong. And the story was like Yip Man and a friend came across a Pakistani police officer beating a Chinese woman in the street. Okay.
This happened while he was in college?
Yeah. So we're talking like an early 20s
so
Yip Man, right?
Visit Hong Kong.
No, that's when he was going to school. The school was in Hong Kong. Have you literally listened to anything I said?
Yeah,
Jesus
I did.
Christ.
My bad. He did.
All right, Mikey, you're taking his post next time. All right?
Don't worry, I can do it right now.
Do you listen?
Yeah.
Do you listen?
So apparently, but this was very early on when Yip Man was there. So the story was that he was actually 18 at this time. And it was just like a year before the Qing dynasty was overthrown, right? And there was like a strong feeling of Chinese nationalism going on during this time, right? Not that I think if there wasn't, people wouldn't be outraged by a Pakistani police officer beating up a Chinese woman, but I think culturally in the zeitgeist at that time, there was like a very strong kind of Chinese kind of idea, right? So the story was that Yip Man went up to the Pakistani police officer and bloodied his face. All right, like yeah. I mean, there's nothing. There's not a whole lot of detail like blow by blow or whatever. But he confronted the officer and then bloodied that dude's face. And then right after that, of course, they retreated. And and then the story was that Yip Man's friend related this story to his family, and an uncle was there, and that uncle was Leung Bic. So that's kind of the story. Like Yip Man beats up this Pakistani guy or whatever, right?
Police officer.
Yeah, police officer. They run away, and then his buddies like telling his family, like, "Oh man, like Yip, Yip Man did this and blah 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 blah." And then he had an uncle there, and that uncle was Leung Bic from Fatsan. And he heard that, and he was like, "Oh, Yip Man is from Fatsan." And Yip Man did what to this guy? And then, so the story was that maybe then Leung Bic suspected that Yip Man maybe was from the Wing Chun family. And then Leung Bic wanted to meet Yip Man, the young Yip Man, And then that's how they came into contact with each other, right?
And he just wanted to teach him. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
so you have to imagine Wing Chun is not like a popular style, right? There are other styles that are way more famous. Wing Chun is relatively unknown, right? So Yip Man visited this uncle of his friend, and he was surprised that this uncle knew anything about Wing Chun, right? And then in very typical fashion, and it's so funny when you read the story because Chinese sifus do this to this day. He meets Leung Bik, and what's the first thing Leung Bik asks him to do? Show me your forms, all right? and I've realized that this is it's partially Chinese culture, right? Although Wing Chun is a style that we focus on practical application, okay? When I stick hands with you, I should be able to defend myself. I should be able to stick. If you fire a punch at me, I should be able to defend the punches or kicks or whatever. Mm-hmm. Wing Chun is not a style where we go, oh, that guy is good because that person knows 30 Wing Chun forms. Okay. All right. We say that person is good because they're skillful, because they can apply their Wing Chun, right? So even though Wing Chun is that style where we focus more on, okay, what can you actually do? Like the talking with the hands, like Wong Sun Leung's nickname, right? Like how well are you? How good are you at talking with your hands? But still, it's still a traditional Chinese martial art. So Wing Chun sifus, even to this day, because I have been victim to this as well, they're not willing like right away to stick hands with you or to watch you do something because that might be giving you too much credit. And what some Chinese sifus want to do is they want to kick you down 9 pegs. So like before you do anything, they want to kick you down 9 pegs to kind of put you down a little bit, subjugate you a little bit. Mm-hmm. So then you're more willing to listen to what they have to say, especially if you're not Chinese, because you're automatically going to be more impressed by how Chinese they are, right? So they will often do stuff like, okay, show me your forms, right? You know, it's not like, okay, like, okay, this person's going to throw some punches at you. What can you do? Or stick some hands with this guy. It's always like, show me your Siu Nim Tao, the most fundamental form. And then they're going to sit there and look, I can take my most senior students who've been with me for many, many years and have arguably heard every single correction I'm ever going to give about the Siu Nim Tao form. And I could still take my most senior student and say, show me your Siu Nim Tao, and still go, this is a little bit off. You need to turn them like up, the shoulders a little out of like this. Like you can nitpick all this stuff. And I can do that with people who've arguably learned everything I'm ever going to teach them. Oh, wow. Because there's always something, especially when it comes to forms, that you can nitpick. Angle of the hand, posture, breathing, how you did this, the tempo of this part. There's always, and Chinese sifus are well aware of this fact. So they can look at you, and even if you had a really rock solid Siu Nim Tao form, they're gonna nitpick it because this is step one to them kicking you down a few notches. Oh, all right, and they look at your Siu Nim Tao form. Oh no, its stance is no good. And then they're going to give you some arbitrary correction as well, like, oh, you stand this way, you should stand this way. Up, head position, hand position, this. And look, a lot of those things may be legitimate criticisms. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the person on the whole, maybe you would say, like, actually their form is quite good, but you can always nitpick. But they're going to nitpick everything in such a way to present it to you as you don't know shit. All right? So, and you have to realize that, okay, if we just look at martial arts on the whole, not like Wing Chun specific or whatever, ultimately it's about what does it do for you and what can you do with it. But Chinese sifus, and obviously a lot of Western sifus have now followed this mold as well, can basically determine, not actually determine, but make you feel that they can totally determine everything about you based on, and let's be honest, when we're doing forms, based on how well you pantomime hand movements in the air. All right? How much time you've decided to dedicate to the pantomiming of movements in the air. They're going to like drop this mic and tell you like you don't know shit. And that might be true. Might also not be true. They might just be being unfair. And then maybe they look at your chumki. Oh, no, you cannot turn this way. You do the. And they do this clearly between lineages because every lineage is different. So the fact that you do it differently than that lineage, they're automatically going to rip you apart. But here's the thing. They do it even within the same lineage. They do it even within the same lineage. When I learned from Sifu Leung Tim, which was after I left the Leung Ting organization, right? I learned the Wundami techniques from Sifu Leung Ting. among other things, right? Of course, he wants to look at my wooden dummy techniques, right? And so he's like, show me your wooden dummy techniques. Now, Siva Leo and Tim learned the wooden dummy from Leung Ting. I learned the wooden dummy from Leung Ting. I know Leung Ting's form, all right? Before he even asked me to show me the wooden dummy, he goes, show me your wooden dummy form. I knew going in, because at that point I had a lot of experience in Hong Kong, he was going to tell me everything I was doing was wrong.
Right.
I could have literally performed the form exactly the way Leung Ting did it in front of him. The guy, the form the same way that he learned from his own Sifu. And he would say, no, it's not like that. All right? Now, on top of that, Siva Leo and Tim has also modified his form. So also he took the form that he learned from Leung Ting and he changed up some things. He changed some palms, he changed some of the kicks.
Okay.
And also he did a little bit of training with Sifu Chan Chi Man. So I think he borrowed some ideas from Sifu Chan Chi Man. So his form is different anyway. So when I performed the form, he told me I was wrong, not even on my technical execution, but because I wasn't doing his choreography, which I had not even learned yet anyway. You know what I mean? So like for example, he did the double palm where like in the Leung Ting one, you do like the old man hands this way here. In the fifth set, he does it with these straight palms, right? That's his modification. That's not like Leung Ting told me to do this, but I did this instead. I did this because that's how I learned from Sifu Leung Ting.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, it needs to be done this way here, because that was his change. But it wasn't like, oh, in my version of the form, we do this palm this way. It was like, no, you're wrong. That palm is supposed to be like this. And introduce choreography I haven't learned yet, which is different, right? And that is something. So like when I read back on my notes and like the young Yip Man meets Leung Bik, and the first thing Leung Bik does is show me your forms. Yeah. You know? I go, I've seen this movie play out, all right? Because then you go, oh no, the Siunam Tao, this is wrong, chumki, and then what you do is you've psychologically kicked that person down a bit. So the time that you even touch hands with them, they're already mentally destroyed. All right?
Oh, no.
Whereas if you just straight up said, hey, let's do some chi sao, right? Maybe that person would be like, okay, we're colleagues, we're equals. And then they're going to go after you, right? But if you kick them down by showing them you cannot even pantomime your frickin' hands the right way in the air, all right?
Damn.
Much less even earn the right to touch hands with me, all right? This is a trick, and this is exactly what Leung Bik did to Yip Man. Show me your forms. And after he did all his forms, or however many forms, maybe just the first form, whatever. There was a story like he said, oh, did you learn the Chum Q yet? And that like pissed off Yip Man. Like, of course I learned the Chum Q, right? and then he shows him his forms, and then he gave him a very, what was the note here? A disappointing review of his forms. All right? And it's so funny because I'm like, I totally know what that's like. All right, I totally know what that's like. And then after that, Yip Man wanted to do some chi sao with the old man, and then the Leung Bik agreed, and Leung Bik handily, controlled the young Yip Man or whatever, right? And Yip Man was really pissed off and left. Now there's stories that one, he felt insulted by Leung Bik. Like the way Leung Bik treated him, which I totally understand, because he kind of was. Two, that he felt shame, because Yip Man at this time, think about it, at 18, he beat up a Pakistani cop. So he's no doubt had some other fights and stuff. Supposedly he also fought with some British kids or whatever. So he knows he can fight, and then here he is kind of being made a clown by this older man. So there's one story that he was like, pissed off of how Leung Bik treated him and left. There's another story that he was disappointed in his own skills. And then there's a third story which is different. Like, it wasn't that he was asked to show his forms. He was asked to actually attack Leung Bik. All right, so this is like a totally different version of the story, right? Which is, again, why you cannot rely on any of this stuff. Who the hell knows if any of this stuff is true? And then, Yip Man attacks Leung Bik, and Leung Bik easily thwarts him. And then, of course, which is more likely than not, this is like just a made-up kind of revisionist history stuff. This altercation happened next to a dock, and Yip Man charges Leung Bik, and Leung Bik turns and he goes into the water, which is just like, I don't believe any of that shit. Yeah, into Victoria Harbor or something like that, right? And then you just go like, yeah, I think...
That's why he was pissed.
Yeah, I think someone spit-shined that story a couple ways from Sunday, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So and then on that version of the story where like he basically attacks, he asks Yip Man to attack him and then he so easily handles him. Apparently in that version of the story, Yip Man didn't know that Leung Bik was a Wing Chun guy. So again, and this is the problem when people like want to tell you exactly what these stories are, right? That version of like how Leung Bik and Yip Man met, if Leung Bik even existed to begin with. All right, so we're already presupposing he exists. One, he knows he's a Wing Chun guy. He asks to see his forms. He has a disappointing review. Then he does Chi Sao and he gets his ass handed to him, right? He leaves disappointed in his skills because he thought he was much better. Second version of the story, he's insulted. He trains with Leung Bik, but Leung Bik doesn't really tell him that he's a Wing Chun guy or something like that, or he attacks him or whatever, and then he falls into the water. And then he leaves dejected because he got beaten by a non-Wing Chun guy because he didn't know that Leung Bik was a Wing Chun guy, right? So
soaking wet.
Yeah, so you have these clashing versions of the story, right? And then when he leaves, in the version of the story where he doesn't know that Leung Bik is a Wing Chun guy, his friend is like, no. My uncle, the one who just beat you up or handed you your ass, he's a Wing Chun guy. As a matter of fact, he is the son of Leung Jan, your Sigong or something like that. And then Yip Man is like in a kung fu movie, right? Like when the guy finally decided to teach Sante in 36 chambers, like, his eyes light up and like, now he's going to go learn, right? And then he's able to learn. Now he knows that he's a Wing Chun guy, and then he starts learning from Leung Bik, right? And then there's another version, like, obviously the one where he feels humiliated or embarrassed. He's too humiliated to return. And another version where, he's super excited to return. So the general vibe is that he was convinced only when his friend revealed that his uncle was from Fatsan, a native named Leung Bik, and he was the son of Leung Jan. So when he told Yip Man this information, right? So again, what did Yip Man know at the time that he met this guy, right? And then realizing this opportunity in front of him, Yip Man is like, okay, well, I guess I need to learn from this guy, right? Because his own Sifu passed away so young, right? So, and then he petitioned Leung Bik to essentially complete his training. Now, again, who knows if this stuff's true? This is stuff that's in my notes. These are things that I've collected, whether it's from David Peterson's book or Genealogy of the Wing Chun Family or elsewhere.
So they're out there.
They're out there, yes. Leung Bik had fallen on hard times and accepted Yip Man's invitation to be his teacher. So apparently Leung Bik wasn't doing very well. And maybe Yip Man had some money because his family was able to pay him, right? And so then he starts learning from Leung Bik. The exact timeline in terms of like how long did he learn from him? What did he learn from him? Is it when he learned his weapons and stuff like that? Is not entirely clear, but supposedly after 1 year of training, all right, Leung Bik passes away. Okay? So again, we're not talking about like during the entire, let's say 4 years that Yip Man was going to college, he was learning from Leung Bik. We're talking like 1 year. Okay, but
devastating.
Again, just devastating, right? All right. But still, if you take this story as true, and you start to go like, Yip Man Sifu died after 3 years, then he learned from a Sihing for a little bit, and then he got some spit shine from a Kung Fu uncle for 1 year. All right.
Damn.
And then supposedly because there were no other students of Leung Bik and no children of Leung Bik, the young Yip Man was the one who officiated his funeral. Now, is that actually true or not? It's almost impossible to verify that stuff, right? But that is 1912.
Wow.
All right. And then so shortly after that time, Yip Man returns to China. All right. So after his time going to school in Hong Kong, he returns to China. The story was because now his Wing Chun was very different. What he learned from Leung Bik was notably different from what he did with his first Siheng, Chung So. And Yip Man didn't want to step on his Siheng's toes because his Siheng was teaching Wing Chun. And now you have to imagine, he was teaching, he learned his Siheng's Wing Chun. He goes to Hong Kong. He gets all these upgrades. He comes back to Fatsan. If Yip Man starts teaching what he learned from Leung Bik in Chinese culture, it would almost be like now he's one-upping his Siheng because he learned all this stuff that his Siheng didn't. So supposedly, although Yip Man did not really teach in China because he was from a wealthy family, he didn't need to teach for money. He only taught some students somewhat casually a little bit later on, people like Wok Fu and Lung Kai and those guys, but not very seriously. So supposedly the story was he more or less just taught what he learned from his first Siheng and did not really teach too much of what he learned from Leung Bik.
Okay.
And supposedly it's the reason why if you look at Yip Man's students from Fatsan, because he only taught a couple people, and they're all passed away now. When you look at their wooden dummy techniques, they didn't even insert their leg into the dummy leg, what we call Yap Ma Bo Fat, the inserting the leg stance technique, which is where you jam your opponent's stance or stick to their leg, like our plum flower step, right?
Yeah.
When you look at Yip Man's Fatsan students, when they do the wooden dummy technique, like let's say, for example, they're doing the po pai, the double palms, they do all of those without inserting their leg behind the dummy leg. So they're basically just doing it with frontally and with turns. So they're doing it literally without footwork. And the story, the hearsay, is that is more or less what Yip Man learned from his first Siheng, and that's why he taught that in Fatsan. But when he came to Hong Kong, he didn't have this problem like making his Siheng look bad or being in competition with him. And then he could finally teach all the stuff that he had learned from Leung Bik or whatever, right? Wow. So, an hour and 15 minutes in, and we
haven't even scratched the surface.
We haven't even scratched the surface on Yip Man, right? We haven't even gotten into most of what the Yip Man movies are about.
What's up with that?
And it's amazing. I talk about the time before Yip Man came to Hong Kong in 1949, we know almost nothing about. Yet somehow I still managed to talk for an hour and 15 minutes about the sketchiest part of what we know about Yip Man, right? So I also need to say again, just in terms of the historical veracity, all right? These are notes that I took from other people's books. How I represented them may not have been entirely accurate, and the facts themselves may also not be that accurate. The truth is, all I talked about today is what we kind of have heard. But I cannot say with any absolute, well, certainly not authority, but even just any kind of security that this really represents accurately what happened. Because the truth is, we don't know. And I wish that Wing Chun historians, the people who call themselves historians, would be a little bit more open and honest about them not really knowing either. Because someone could have done this exact podcast, said all the things I just told you, but said it as if it was exactly true.
Actual factual.
And the things that we just don't know. There's with no certainty can we say any of these things, right? And that's all I got to say about that. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Kung Fu Genius, hit that bell for notifications, and any questions you have for me to answer on a future episode, put those in the comments below, or if you have ideas about things you want me to talk about, let us know below. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex Richter, always the victor.
Before he came to Hong Kong, we actually, what's going on? Yeah, someone decided to bang on pipes for no reason, right? They haven't fixed anything in this building in 100 years. And now we're recording a podcast. Someone's like, I'm going to bang some pipes.
Let me fix that thing that broke the other day.
Going to use a hammer to bang on some pipes. Yeah. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius, hit that bell for notification.
Hit that bell for Novocaine.
Novocaine. I feel like my head has been shot with Novocaine.
All right. It begins.
All right.
It begins.
No, it doesn't begin.
Yes.
This is our time.
This is our time.
Yes. Stop.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you guys are definitely helping. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu. Fuck you. Don't start. Don't even start.
Yes.
Look the other way. Just look the other way. I don't want to look at your face.
I'm high right here.
Dre.
I'm high right behind the screen.
Dre,
the
look
screen
the other
is as big as my head.
No, you got a bigger head than you think. Dre, I want you to face the curtain.
Shane Diesel, face
turn
the
around.
curtain.
Face the curtain. I don't want to look at your face.
That? Like
all right. This? Okay. Yeah, we had a YouTube commenter say that Dre is Shane Diesel, which apparently
no one knows who he is, though.
A lot of people. I had to Google him. He's apparently an adult film star.
Yes, feel free to Google.
You mean he's an adult?
Diesel.
He's not a child, or he's not a teenager.
Unlike
star.
you. Turn around. I got to get through this. I already messed up twice. This is not looking good. face the curtain. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoy. You. Seriously, stop.
Didn't do anything.
Okay, I need you to look the other way. I need you to look the other way. No, Dre, do not play with the curtain. All right?
We feel like we're at school
I'm not playing
now.
with the curtain.
Don't,
I'm just
Dre,
making sure it's
Dre,
closed,
Dre,
so no one peeks
Dre,
in.
hands on your lap. Look at the curtain. Look away. All right? Do not move. Don't touch anything. Don't do anything. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to... I see you moving. You're moving. You were... Both of you out.
I have to do my intro.
Yeah, you can do it after I finish mine. All right? Out. You're not even in here, but I can feel it. I can feel the vibes. Man, once you get the giggles, it's hard to get it out, right? Quiet. Jesus Christ, I don't know if I can do this. Oh my God. Let me get this done. Get out of here, out of here, out of here. As always, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, sub.
Golden moments in history.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right,
I maybe never said this before, but I f***ing hate you guys. All right, let's go. All right.
Just a Mikey.
Oh, wow, finally in front of him. It's amazing. Ken to each a broken dog, new tricks. I'm gonna murder you guys with ASMR.
Oh, no.
Dre. The best intro to this episode.
Stop. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, what?
What? I literally just turned my head this way.
All right, peeps. On today's... Oh, these are cool.
Ooh.
I forgot my shades are here. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all...
He won't be answering.
Genius will not be answering all sorts... All right.
Serenity now.
The genius will be not answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube.
No. The genius will be not. It's not good English. The genius will not be answering.
Will be not. All right, peoples. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will not be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems. Lots of... Why did I just do that?
Yeah.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will not be answering all types of shit from you guys. Lots of Yip Man's dysfunctional forms. Dysfunctional forms.
Mostly terrible.
All right.